Welcome back to our channel. Today we're diving into one of the most mysterious and overlooked stories in the Bible. The forgotten tribe of Dan, one of the 12 tribes of Israel that has largely been forgotten in biblical discussions. This is more than just a history lesson. It's a tale of power, betrayal, lost potential, and a chilling prophecy that has left scholars and believers puzzled for centuries. Who were the Danites? What role did they play in the history of Israel? Why did Dan disappear from the pages of prophecy? Could their story hold hidden warnings for us today? And what can we learn from their rise and fall? From their bold beginnings as judges and warriors to their tragic descent into idolatry and ultimate disappearance from the book of Revelation, the story of Dan is filled with powerful lessons that still speak to us today. If you've ever wondered why this tribe vanished from biblical prophecy or what their journey means for believers now, then this is a story you can't afford to miss. Stay with us until the end to uncover the untold truths about Dan's journey, the lessons we can learn, and how this forgotten tribe story might just change the way you see the entire Bible. If you enjoy deep dives into the hidden and often overlooked stories of Scripture, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with others. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, so let's start a conversation. Your support helps us bring more insightful content to the world, so don't miss out. Let's uncover the secrets of Dan together. The tribe of Dan traces its roots back to Dan, the fifth son of Jacob and the first son of Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant. Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, had struggled with infertility for many years, watching as her sister Leah bore children. In her desperation to have children and compete with her sister, Rachel gave her maidservant Bilhah to Jacob as a surrogate wife. In Genesis chapter 30 verses 5 to 6, Bilhah conceived and bore a son, and Rachel named him Dan, which means judge, saying, "God has judged me, and has also heard my voice and given me a son." This name reflected Rachel's sense of vindication and her belief that God had finally answered her pleas for a child. Dan's birth was significant, not just for Rachel, but for the broader narrative of Israel's tribes. As one of the 12 sons of Jacob, Dan was destined to become the patriarch of one of the 12 tribes of Israel, each of which played a unique role in the history of God's chosen people. Though born through a surrogate, Dan was fully integrated into the family, carrying the heritage and the promise of God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When Jacob blessed his sons before his death, he gave each of them a prophetic word that reflected their character and the future of their descendants. Dan's blessing was both a promise and a warning. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels so that its rider shall fall backward. Genesis chapter 49 verses 16 to 17. This prophecy speaks to both the strengths and the potential pitfalls that would define Dan's legacy. The phrase, "Dan shall judge his people," highlights Dan's potential as a leader and arbiter within Israel. This is echoed later in the book of Judges, where Samson, one of Israel's most famous judges, emerges from the tribe of Dan. Judges chapter 13 to 16. Samson's story of strength and his struggle with personal flaws captures both the promise and the challenges foretold in Jacob's blessing. However, Jacob's prophecy also warned of danger, symbolized by the image of a serpent, a creature associated with subtlety, deception, and sudden attack. This imagery hinted at future troubles that would come from within the tribe. The description of Dan as a viper by the path suggested a tendency toward rebellion and unexpected actions that could disrupt and cause harm. This foreshadowed the idolatrous tendencies that would later plague the tribe, as seen in the story of the carved image in Judges chapter 18. Moreover, Jacob's portrayal of Dan's descendants as biting at the heels of a horse so that its rider falls backward symbolizes the tribe's potential to undermine or disrupt. While this could be seen as a metaphor for strategic warfare or cunning, it also alludes to the spiritual pitfalls that would mark Dan's history. In many ways, Dan's origin story is a microcosm of the human experience, marked by triumphs, struggles, and the continual challenge of living up to God's calling. It serves as a reminder that every tribe and every person in the biblical narrative had a purpose within God's plan, even when they faltered. The story of Dan emphasizes the importance of relying on God's guidance and staying true to His commands, lest we too fall prey to the pitfalls of our own making. Now, let's explore further about the Danites' journey and settlement. When the Israelites entered the Promised Land under Joshua's leadership, each of the 12 tribes received an inheritance of land as a fulfillment of God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The tribe of Dan was assigned a portion of land along the western coast of Canaan, situated between the powerful tribes of Judah to the south and Ephraim to the north. Joshua chapter 19 verses 40 to 48. This territory included fertile land and access to the Mediterranean Sea, making it potentially prosperous. However, Dan's inheritance was fraught with challenges that would shape their destiny. The coastal region allotted to Dan was strategically significant, but also highly contested. The Philistines, a powerful and warlike people known for their iron chariots and military prowess, controlled much of the surrounding area. Judges chapter 1 verse 34 highlights the difficulty faced by the Danites. The Amorites forced the children of Dan into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down to the valley. This constant harassment made it nearly impossible for Dan to fully settle and secure their inheritance. Instead of becoming a thriving community, the Danites were often pushed back, confined to the hills, and subjected to ongoing conflicts. This pressure led the Danites to seek an alternative home. In Judges chapter 18, the Danites embarked on a journey northward to find a place where they could settle without the constant threat of their enemies. This passage begins with a telling statement. In those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking a place of their own where they might settle. Because they had not yet come into an inheritance among the tribes of Israel, Judges chapter 18 verse 1. This search was not just about finding land, it was a quest for identity and security in a hostile environment. The Danites eventually sent 5 spies to scout the land, who came upon the city of Laish, a peaceful and prosperous city located in the far north of Israel, near the sources of the Jordan River. The spies observed that the people of Laish lived quiet and secure, Judges chapter 18 verse 7, with no strong allies to defend them. Seeing an opportunity, the Danites decided to take Laish for themselves. They launched a surprise attack, capturing the city and slaughtering its inhabitants. They then rebuilt the city and renamed it Dan, establishing a new tribal center far from their original allotment. Judges chapter 18 verses 27 to 29. This migration was significant for several reasons. Geographically, it moved the tribe of Dan to the northernmost part of Israel, creating a buffer between Israel and surrounding hostile nations. However, this relocation also isolated the Danites from the main body of Israel, both physically and spiritually. While the move offered temporary security, it also disconnected them from the central worship and governance of Israel, which was concentrated in the southern and central regions, especially around Jerusalem. This geographical separation contributed to Dan's spiritual decline. They set up their own system of worship in their new territory, distinct from the established religious practices of the other tribes. Judges chapter 18 verses 30 to 31 records that the Danites established a carved image in their new city. Employing their own priests rather than those from the Levitical line, the people of Dan set up the carved image for themselves, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Moses, and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the time of the captivity of the land. This unauthorized worship led Dan further away from the covenantal relationship that God had established with Israel. Their choice to adopt and institutionalize idolatry in their new settlement became a dark chapter in their history, fulfilling some of the warnings seen in Jacob's earlier prophecy. The story of the Danites' journey and settlement is one of resilience, but also of compromise and departure from God's commands. By seeking their own path and establishing their own form of worship, the tribe set a precedent that distanced them from the rest of Israel and from the covenantal blessings intended for God's people. This isolation, both geographic and spiritual, contributed to Dan's fading from the collective memory of Israel, and, ultimately, their omission in prophetic scriptures like Revelation 7 serves as a sobering reminder of the consequences of straying from God's path. Now, let's discover further about the downfall of Dan. The tribe of Dan is often remembered for its struggle with idolatry, a sin that plagued many of the tribes of Israel, but was especially pronounced among the Danites. This inclination towards idol worship marked a significant deviation from the covenantal worship of Yahweh, setting Dan apart as a cautionary example of spiritual compromise. The seeds of this downfall were sown early in the tribe's history and became entrenched when they established their new settlement in the northern city of Dan. One of the clearest instances of this departure from true worship is recorded in Judges, chapter 18, verses 30 to 31. The people of Dan set up the carved image for themselves, and Jonathan, son of Gershom, the son of Moses, and his sons were priests for the tribe of Dan until the time of the captivity of the land. This passage reveals that the Danites set up their own unauthorized system of worship, complete with graven images and self-appointed priests. Instead of adhering to the centralized worship of God in Jerusalem, the Danites created their own religious practices, separate from the rest of Israel. This move was a direct violation of God's commandments. The second of the 10 Commandments clearly states, "You shall not make for yourself a carved image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them." Exodus chapter 20, verses 4 to 5. By creating and worshipping graven images, Dan not only disobeyed God's direct command, but also led others into sin, setting a dangerous precedent that contributed to the spiritual decay of the northern kingdom of Israel. The tribe's embrace of idolatry was not just an isolated failure, it had far-reaching consequences that influenced the entire region. Dan's establishment of idol worship was mirrored later by King Jeroboam I, who set up golden calves in Bethel and Dan as alternative worship centers to Jerusalem. Jeroboam's actions were a deliberate attempt to prevent the northern tribes from going to Jerusalem to worship, thereby consolidating his political power but also deepening the spiritual rebellion of the northern kingdom. The prophet Amos, speaking during a time of spiritual and moral decline in Israel, condemned this idolatrous worship. Those who swear by the sin of Samaria, who say, "As your God lives, O Dan, and as the way of Beersheba lives, they shall fall and never rise again." Amos chapter 8, verse 14. Amos's rebuke highlights that Dan's idolatry had become a recognized sin that symbolized the unfaithfulness of Israel. It was no longer just Dan's sin, it was a national issue that demonstrated how far the people had strayed from God. This pattern of idolatry also fulfilled the negative aspects of Jacob's prophecy about Dan, where he warned that Dan would be like a serpent and viper by the road. Genesis chapter 49, verses 16 to 17. The Danites' actions, particularly their establishment of false worship, were like a bite that weakened the spiritual integrity of Israel, causing many to fall away from true worship of the Lord. Now, let's explore further about the mystery of Dan's disappearance. One of the most intriguing and debated mysteries in the Bible is the absence of the tribe of Dan from the list of the 12 tribes in Revelation chapter 7. Where 144,000 people are sealed from each tribe of Israel. In this list, the tribe of Manasseh, one of Joseph's sons, is mentioned alongside Joseph himself, effectively replacing Dan. This omission has sparked significant speculation among scholars and theologians, raising questions about why Dan is missing from this critical prophetic moment. The exclusion of Dan from the list of the 12 tribes is highly unusual because Dan is consistently listed among the tribes in the Old Testament, from the allotment of land in Joshua. Chapter 19, to genealogies in the Chronicles. However, When it comes to the end times prophecy and revelation, Dan's absence is glaring, and its implications are profound. Many scholars believe that Dan's exclusion could be linked to the tribe's historical association with idolatry and spiritual unfaithfulness. As recorded in Judges, chapter 18, verses 30 to 31, Dan was the first tribe to establish a formal system of idol worship, setting up graven images and appointing priests outside the Levitical order. This early departure from God's commands set a precedent for the spiritual decay that would characterize the northern kingdom of Israel. Dan's legacy of idolatry is seen as a direct violation of God's laws, which explicitly forbade the making and worshipping of idols. Exodus chapter 20, verses 4 to 5. Throughout Israel's history, the Danites' actions were often seen as a cautionary tale of what happens when a tribe or nation turns away from God. Their spiritual compromises, highlighted by their embrace of idol worship, may have contributed to their symbolic exclusion from the sealed tribes in Revelation. In Revelation, chapter 7, verses 4 to 8, the tribes of Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin are listed, but Dan is notably missing. This absence has led many to speculate that their unfaithfulness and idolatry had far-reaching consequences, even affecting their role in prophetic visions of the future. The exclusion of Dan has led some early church fathers and ancient Jewish commentators to speculate that the tribe's legacy of idolatry might foreshadow the coming of the Antichrist. Drawing on Jacob's prophecy in Genesis chapter 49, verse 17, where Dan is described as a serpent by the way, a viper by the path, some believe that this symbolism hints at treachery and deception. The imagery of a serpent, often associated with Satan and evil in biblical literature, has fueled theories that the Antichrist could emerge from the tribe of Dan, symbolizing ultimate rebellion against God. In the apocryphal literature, such as the writings of Irenaeus, an early church father, Dan is sometimes connected with the coming of a deceiver in the end times. Irenaeus wrote that, "Dan is the tribe out of which the Antichrist will be born," highlighting the deeply negative view of Dan's role in eschatological expectations. While this view is not directly stated in the canonical scriptures, it reflects the long-standing suspicion and negative perception of Dan's spiritual legacy. The absence of Dan from Revelation's list of sealed tribes serves as a powerful theological statement about the consequences of spiritual compromise and disobedience. It underscores the biblical theme that actions have lasting repercussions, both for individuals and for entire communities. While God's grace and mercy are available to all, persistent unfaithfulness, as seen in the history of Dan, can lead to spiritual exile and separation from God's ultimate promises. Although the tribe of Dan fell into idolatry and gradually faded into obscurity, their story holds valuable lessons that resonate deeply with believers today. Dan's journey serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of straying from God's commands and the consequences of spiritual compromise. The Danites' quest for a new home, their struggle against external enemies, and their ultimate failure to maintain their identity within God's covenant all serve as a cautionary tale for those who seek to live a life of faith. Dan's early promise as a judge and leader among the tribes was marred by decisions that prioritized convenience and security over faithfulness to God. When faced with challenges in their allotted land, instead of relying on God for deliverance, the Danites took matters into their own hands, seeking a new territory in Laish. This decision to migrate northward, though seemingly practical, marked the beginning of their spiritual decline. By taking what seemed like an easy path, they distanced themselves physically and spiritually from the rest of Israel, eventually establishing a rival center of worship that led them further away from God. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 12 encapsulates this mindset. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. The Danites' actions illustrate this verse vividly. They chose what appeared to be a sensible solution, but in doing so, they stepped outside of God's will. This choice set the stage for ongoing spiritual decay, characterized by idolatry and a separation from God's prescribed way of worship. Dan's story is a stark reminder for believers today to stay vigilant in their walk with God, rejecting the allure of idols, whether material possessions, personal achievements, or ideologies that conflict with God's word. It calls us to examine our hearts, as stated in Psalm chapter 139, verses 23 to 24. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. By regularly seeking God's guidance and aligning our lives with His commands, we can avoid the pitfalls that led to Dan's downfall. The legacy of Dan challenges us to prioritize obedience over convenience, faithfulness over compromise, and true worship over the pursuit of self-made solutions. It reminds us that God's grace is always available, but it also underscores the importance of staying committed to His ways. As we reflect on Dan's journey, let it be a warning of the dangers of straying from God, but also an encouragement that, through repentance and faith, we can always find our way back into the arms of our loving Creator. In conclusion, the story of the tribe of Dan is a powerful reminder of the importance of obedience, faithfulness, and the dangers of turning away from God. Though they are often forgotten in the pages of history, their legacy still speaks to us today. If you found this deep dive into the history of Dan insightful, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others who might find it meaningful. Let's continue to explore the rich and often untold stories of the Bible together. Thank you for watching, and may God bless you.